There are places within every police station that officers prefer to avoid. The holding cells at 3 a.m., the interview rooms after a long interrogation. But perhaps none inspire quite the same unease as the evidence room, particularly during the graveyard shift. When the building falls silent and the fluorescent lights hum their endless monotone song, evidence rooms are repositories of human tragedy. Every tagged bag, every sealed box contains a fragment of someone's worst day. Weapons used in violence, personal belongings recovered from crime scenes, items too disturbing to be returned to families, photographs that cannot be unseen. These rooms exist in a state of suspended narrative, stories frozen mid-telling, waiting for their day in court or their eventual destruction. For the officers assigned to process and catalog this material, the work is methodical, solitary, and psychologically demanding. They spend hours alone with the physical remnants of crimes, handling objects that carry the weight of trauma. Most officers rotate through the duty, spending just enough time to fulfill their obligation before returning to patrol work or investigations. But some are assigned permanently, working through the quiet hours when the rest of the department sleeps. It's during these night shifts that the unexplained tends to surface. Objects that move without being touched, sounds emanating from sealed containers, surveillance footage capturing anomalies that shouldn't exist. The official position has always been that evidence rooms are secure, climate-controlled spaces where nothing unusual ever occurs. But speak quietly with any veteran officer, and you'll hear a different story. This episode explores accounts from law enforcement personnel who have worked the night watch in evidence rooms across different jurisdictions. Each report follows strict protocols. Each witness underwent evaluation. Yet what they experienced defies every procedural manual ever written. Case 1. Detroit, Michigan, March 15, 2018. The Metropolitan Police Department's Central Evidence Facility occupies the basement level of the main precinct building, a converted warehouse, structure dating back to the 1960s. The facility spans over 8,000 square feet, divided into climate-controlled sections based on the type of material being stored. Firearms in one area, narcotics in another, cold case materials in the back, where the oldest unsolved crimes gather dust. On the night of March 15, 2018, a junior officer was assigned to process a backlog of items from recent burglaries. The work was tedious but straightforward. Scan each item, photograph it, update the database, file it in the appropriate location. She had been at it for 3 hours when she noticed something strange. One of the evidence bags contained a child's music box recovered from a home invasion. The box itself was unremarkable, pink with faded ballerinas painted on the lid, the kind sold in gift shops for $20. According to the case file, the homeowners reported that the box had belonged to their daughter, who had died in a car accident 7 years earlier. The intruder had apparently taken nothing else from the child's room, but had opened the music box and left it playing on the bed. As the officer photographed the item, she noticed the mechanism inside appeared wound. Without thinking, she lifted the lid. The tinkling melody began to play, a simple lullaby she didn't recognize. She closed the lid after a few seconds and placed it back in the evidence bag, sealing it according to protocol. 20 minutes later, she heard music. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system, but unmistakable. The same lullaby, the same tinkling notes. She stood from her workstation and followed the sound to a shelf 3 aisles away. The evidence bag containing the music box sat exactly where she'd filed it, sealed and undisturbed. Yet through the plastic, she could see the lid was open and the mechanism was turning. She retrieved the bag and examined it carefully. The seal was intact. There was no tear, no opening. Yet the music box continued to play. She watched the tiny ballerina spin inside its plastic prison, the melody echoing through the empty room. When the song finally wound down and stopped, she resealed the bag with an additional evidence tag and placed it in a different location. The music started, again at 2:47 a.m., then again at 3:15 a.m., each time from a different part of the room. Each time the bag remained sealed. The officer completed her shift and filed a report noting possible mechanical malfunction with the evidence item. The music box was later examined by a forensic technician, who found the spring mechanism completely unwound and incapable of playing. The case file was updated, and the item was eventually destroyed per department policy. But the officer requested permanent reassignment to day shifts and refused to work alone in the evidence room again. Case 2. Manchester, England, November 8, 2020. British police services maintain strict chain of custody protocols for all evidence, particularly in serious criminal cases. Items are logged, photographed, and stored in secure facilities with limited access. In the northwest of England, the Greater Manchester Police operate several such facilities, including one dedicated exclusively to cold cases and historical material. It was in this facility that a civilian evidence technician encountered something that would lead to a formal investigation by the department's Internal Affairs Division. The incident occurred during an overnight audit of materials related to cases from the 1990s, specifically a series of unsolved homicides that had gone cold. Decades earlier, the technician was working through boxes of personal effects when he came across a Polaroid photograph. The image showed a young woman standing in what appeared to be a park, smiling at the camera. On the back, someone had written a date, August 3, 1994, according to the case notes. The photograph had been found in the victim's apartment following her disappearance. She had never been seen again. The technician scanned the photograph into the database and set it aside. 2 hours later, while processing a different box from the same case, he found another photograph. This one showed the same woman in the same park, wearing the same clothes. But her expression had changed. She was no longer smiling. Her face looked strained, anxious, so she just noticed something alarming off camera, confused. The technician returned to the first box and retrieved the original photograph. The woman was still smiling. He placed both images side by side and photographed them with his phone for documentation. The timestamps on the evidence bags confirmed both had been sealed since 1994, logged by different officers on different dates. Over the next hour, he discovered 3 more photographs of the same woman, all from the same case, all supposedly taken on the same day. In each image, her expression had deteriorated further. In the final photograph, she appeared to be screaming. The technician immediately reported the discrepancy to his supervisor. An investigation was launched to determine if the evidence had been tampered with or if the case notes were inaccurate. Forensic analysis of the photographs confirmed they were all original Polaroids from the 1990s, showing no signs of digital manipulation or reproduction. The chemical composition of the film matched the era, and the degradation patterns were consistent with items stored for nearly 30 years. Yet, 5 different photographs existed where case notes indicated there should have been only one. More disturbing when compared with the digital scans taken during processing. Several of the images appeared to show subtle differences in the background. In one scan, a figure could be seen standing among the trees behind the woman, partially obscured by shadow. In the physical photograph, the trees were empty. The case was never resolved. The photographs remain in storage, filed under anomalous evidence with a notation that they should not be handled without supervisor approval. The woman they depicted has never been found. Case 3, Phoenix, Arizona, June 22, 2021. Not all evidence room incidents involve objects. Sometimes the disturbance comes from what officers hear rather than what they see. In the summer of 2021, the Phoenix Police Department received multiple complaints from night shift personnel working in the Property Crimes Division, all centered around the same phenomenon. Voices coming from the evidence lockers. The complaints began. In late June, when a sergeant working overnight inventory reported hearing what sounded like muffled conversation emanating from a bank of storage lockers designated for electronics. Initially, he assumed someone had left a radio or phone powered on inside one of the units. But when he opened each locker systematically, he found nothing that could produce sound. The voices stopped when the lockers were opened and resumed once they were sealed again. Over the following week, 3 other officers reported identical experiences. The voices were always indistinct, like multiple people speaking simultaneously in a language that couldn't quite be understood. One officer described it as listening to a television in another room where you can hear the rhythm and tone of speech but can't make out the words. Department maintenance was called to inspect the lockers for electrical interference or ventilation issues that might create auditory illusions. Nothing unusual was found. The room was then sealed and monitored via security camera for 48 hours. The footage showed no one entering or exiting. Yet the audio track captured the same muffled voices at irregular intervals throughout both nights. Curious detail emerged when officers began correlating the timing of the voices with specific evidence items. The phenomenon occurred most frequently when Locker 47 was sealed, a unit containing multiple cell phones seized during a drug trafficking investigation. The phones had been wiped and powered down according to protocol. Yet something about their presence seemed to trigger the disturbance. On July 3rd, an officer working alone decided to conduct an unauthorized experiment. He removed all items from Locker 47, except for the cell phones, sealed the door, and waited. Within minutes, the voices began. This time, he recorded the audio on his personal phone and later submitted it as part of an incident report. Audio analysis by the department's Technical Services Division identified at least 7 distinct vocal patterns in the recording, though the speech remained unintelligible. More unsettling was a background sound that analysts described as similar to breathing, but at an impossible frequency and volume. The phones were eventually released to the prosecution, and the case went to trial. After the items were removed, the voices stopped. No explanation was ever provided in the official report. But officers assigned to that facility now avoid working alone near the electronics lockers, particularly after midnight. Case 4, Toronto, Canada, September 14, 2022. Evidence processing sometimes requires officers to review security footage from crime scenes, a task that can be mind-numbing when dealing with hours of material. In September 2022, Toronto detective was assigned to review surveillance footage from a convenience store robbery that had resulted in a clerk's death. The footage spanned from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., capturing the hours leading up to and following the incident. The detective had watched the footage multiple times during the initial investigation, but protocol required a secondary review before trial. She settled into the evidence room's viewing station and began the playback at double speed, looking for any details she might have missed. At approximately 8:17 p.m. in the footage, just over an hour before the robbery, she noticed something odd. A customer had entered the store and approached the counter, but their reflection in the store's security mirror didn't match their movements. While the person walked toward the clerk, their reflection remained motionless near the door. Facing the opposite direction, she rewound the footage and watched it again at normal speed. The discrepancy was clear. The customer moved through the store normally, but their reflection behaved as though it were a separate entity, lagging several seconds behind and occasionally moving in ways that didn't correspond to the person's actual position. More disturbing was what happened next. At 8:19 p.m., the customer left the store, but their reflection remained visible in the mirror for an additional 43 seconds. Standing motionless in the center of the frame, before finally fading from view, the detective documented the anomaly and continued reviewing the footage. At 9:52 p.m., just 8 minutes before the robbery, the same reflection appeared in the mirror again, this time without any corresponding person in the store. It stood in the same location, facing the camera, completely still. When the robber entered at 10 p.m., the reflection vanished. She compiled a report with time-stamped screenshots and forwarded it to her supervisor. A second detective was assigned to review the footage independently. He confirmed the anomaly, noting that the reflection appeared to be observing the store in the hour leading up to the crime, as though it were waiting. Technical analysis of the footage found no evidence of editing or corruption. The recording was continuous, and the metadata matched the surveillance system's specifications. Yet the reflection existed independently of any physical person, appearing and disappearing without explanation. The footage was presented during the trial. Though the defense successfully argued for the exclusion of any testimony regarding the reflection, calling it irrelevant to the robbery itself, The defendant was convicted based on other evidence. But the detective who first noticed the anomaly has since requested to avoid cases requiring extensive video review, stating in her request that she no longer trusts what appears on screen. Case 5. Adelaide, Australia, February 28, 2023. The most recent account comes from South Australia, where a police evidence facility experienced a series of incidents that led to a temporary closure and full security audit. The events began on the night of February 28, 2023, when 2 officers were processing evidence from a suspected arson case that had resulted in 3 deaths. Among the items recovered from the scene were several partially burned photographs and a charred diary. The diary had been sealed in an airtight container to preserve what remained of the pages, but the photographs were stable enough to be handled. The officers were photographing each item for digital archival when they noticed something unusual about one particular image. The photograph showed a family of 4 standing in front of a house. The image quality was poor due to fire damage, but the faces were still partially visible. As the first officer held the photograph under the document camera, the second officer noticed movement in the peripheral edges of the image. At first, he thought it was a shadow cast by the overhead light, but when he looked directly at the photograph, the movement stopped. They switched positions. The second officer held the photograph while the first one observed. Again, when viewed peripherally, something in the image appeared to shift, specifically in the background behind the family. But looking directly at it revealed nothing unusual. They decided to scan the photograph at high resolution and examine it on a computer screen. The digital image showed what appeared to be a 5th figure standing in the doorway of the house. It's barely visible due to the fire damage. Neither officer recalled seeing this figure in the physical photograph. They returned to the original. The figure was not there. They scanned it again. The figure reappeared in the digital version, clearer this time, showing what looked like a person with their arms outstretched, positioned directly behind where the family stood. Over the next hour, they conducted multiple scans using different equipment. Each digital image showed the figure becoming progressively more defined, moving closer to the family with each scan. In the final image, the figure appeared to be standing between the parents, its arms draped across their shoulders, its face turned directly toward the camera. The officers immediately contacted their supervisor and sealed the photograph in an evidence bag. When the supervisor arrived and requested to see the digital scans, they discovered that all the files had been corrupted. Each image opened as a solid black frame with a single word repeated hundreds of times in white text: watching. The IT department was called to investigate. They recovered the original scan files, which showed only the family in front of the house, with no additional figure. The corrupted files could not be explained, as the computer system showed no signs of malware or external interference. The photograph itself was sent for forensic analysis, which found no evidence of double exposure or manipulation. The facility was closed for 3 days while all equipment was inspected and replaced. No technical fault was found. The photograph remains in storage, but it is no longer processed digitally. Officers are instructed to handle it only when necessary and never alone.